My wife's sitting in the back, and she tells me all the time, if you get old enough, they'll applaud just when they hear your name. I have a 15-year-old grandson, and he periodically calls. He lives in New York, and periodically calls to check on my conduct. And so he called about you all, and I told him that I was going to have this chance to be with you. And he said, "What's the first thing you're going to say?" I said, "The first thing I'm going to say is, I am so happy to be with you all." Jack said, "Gran, you're 85 years old. You're happy to be anywhere." And he's right, but I'm particularly happy to be here with you and with my pal Ken Paulson. We haven't done this together in a while, but he's right. For 10 years we did routinely, sometimes weekly, and to all sorts of groups. And I see some of you who sat in, and as Ken said, this is going to be largely, mostly, almost completely different. You might recognize one issue or two, but problem is, when Ken and I do this, neither of us has the slightest idea how you're going to feel about it when it's over. We're going to be talking about those 45 words in the First Amendment. And we're going to be addressing it in a little bit different way. And I don't know about you, but I look back over all the years I was in journalism, starting in 1949. Come in, Andrew. As a reporter, as an editor, as a publisher, an editorialist. I look back on all that time, and the truth of the matter is that for most of the time I took it for granted. About the only time it ever really occurred to me to worry about it, I thought about it in terms of the Free Press Clause. You know, it was there for those of us who were journalists. If we were sued, and certainly we were, for libel, or invasion of privacy, and we were, or if we sued to open records or to open public meetings that were being held in secret, the amendment helped. But day in, day out, year in, year in, decade after decade, I took it for granted. And you know, here at the First Amendment Center, since we've been open now, a couple of decades we've been in operation, you know, you get a sense suddenly that it doesn't just belong to you. It's not just the Free Press Clause, it belongs to everybody. And as I say, we're going to go through this exercise, and when we're through with it, if you don't take away anything else, I just ask you to think about the founders for a minute. I can remember the last 5 years I was in the newsroom, I began to worry about those polls and readership surveys said we were losing our credibility, that we were seen as biased, because it was always there, but suddenly those attitudes were growing. We were seen as arrogant. And you know, it occurred to me, we've had all these years, but we could lose this thing. And you know, Alexander Hamilton once said, as they were talking about a Bill of Rights and freedom of the press, he said, and this is, he was talking about a free press, and these are his words: whatever fine words may be inserted into a constitution, it finally will depend altogether, his words, on public opinion and the general spirit of the people and the government. And what he is saying is, public opinion, general spirit of the people, the government, turn against you, you can lose it. And so I hope you go away remembering that admonition, and remembering as well what Ben Franklin said, it's a precious gift to be preserved and protected. Ken?
Thank you, John. Well, we sort of understand where you're at. We've attended a lot of news media conferences, conventions, and here you're told at the end of the day, on which you've probably done some traveling, you've been told you cannot get on the bus to go eat and drink downtown until you've heard these two guys talk about a 220-year-old amendment to the Constitution. Pretty much your fantasy afternoon, isn't it? But we're going to have some fun. And one of the things we've learned in our history together is the best way to kind of enlighten people about the hidden aspects of the First Amendment is to give them a pop quiz, find out what they know. And so just the word pop quiz, a shiver just shot up your spine, right? Because you think, I'm a professional and I want to look good to my peers. Please don't humiliate me. And I promise you there will be no individual humiliation. You'll be humiliated in groups of two. And so this is a moment where you look to your left and your right, and if you're sitting next to somebody who's not terribly bright, move right now. Those of you who are courageous enough to sit up front, you kind of need to pair off. I need you guys to be close to each other. So if you're not in a pod of two, I need you to get there if you don't mind. Let me explain how this is going to work. Series of questions, and each of you will compare notes with your colleague, and you will write down the answer to the question. If you get the answer right, you just give yourself a hash mark. You need to keep your own score. This is critically important. You keep your own score. If anybody needs paper, we've got somebody can hand out in the back. It's also important at this juncture, you understand what the First Amendment Center really stands for. We stand for free speech. We stand for free press, and today we stand for free stuff.
Right on.
Extraordinary stuff. Today's edition of our little presentation is all about how the First Amendment intertwines with the oldest of media and the newest of media. So appropriately, the top 10 teams in this competition, so it's a good number of you, will walk out of here with one of these extraordinary prizes. First of all, old school, you will leave with a newspaper that is at least 100 years old, typically 150 years old. We buy these from a newspaper dealer in Philadelphia. This happens to be a paper called the New York Times. And most of these are in the 1870s, 1860s, so you'll get this collector's item. On the other hand, if you finish first or second, and actually, if you finish first, a team of two, you will leave here with one of two Kindles we have here today. So I'm disturbed by that reaction. I'm disturbed by that reaction because they're not making these anymore. I mean, there may be 25 of these still in existence. Amazon's turning these out each and every day. All right. So you're duly motivated, I hope. All right. We're going to share a series of questions with you, and you consult with your teammate and keep your score. It's that simple. I want to just kind of reflect just for a moment about the history of what we now call new media, which sounds really old and dated, right? There is a tendency in our business to view this as having engulfed us all of a sudden. It's the revolution, digital revolution swamped our newspapers. We sure should have seen it coming. I want to show you, well, first of all, this is the oldest possible document. That's the reason why we're here. And of course, that represents the traditional values we've had in this country for more than 200 years. But take a look at this, the cover of Time magazine. Without squinting, tell me what year that was. 78. Somebody squinted. Very good. 1978. We declared ourselves a computer society in 1978, and how the entire society was going to be transformed by computers, devices you could carry around. You see that calculator there, which was about $75 at the time, now $1 in a bin at Walmart. Anyway, we saw it coming. And we often forget about the other things that were part of the mix that led to the kind of industry we have today. Let me show you the next one. This is an ad for CompuServe. In this ad, they are announcing email. 1983. They're announcing email in 83. Next screen. How many of you have logged onto that screen at one point in your life? There you go. Prodigy. Look at that, 1980 to 1990. So this would have been the login screen in 1990. Does anybody remember the critical error, marketing error Prodigy did in 1991 that lost a significant share of its lead over others? It was always second to CompuServe, but they made a boneheaded move. They decided that they were going to charge for those who use too much email, right? They put a cap of 30 emails a month. Whoops. The point of all this is every couple of years, from 1980 through today, somebody reinvents a model and we all think this is going to be it. I mean, this was the garden model. You had to go to the site, stay within the site. When I was at Westchester as the editor, I negotiated both Prodigy and CompuServe. That looked like the future. And then came Mosaic and browsers. You know, it gets reinvented every couple of years. So the notion that it's ever going to settle down is probably naive. But despite all that change, that stinking piece of parchment at the beginning has continued to be applicable to every form of media we have. And the guiding principles that applied to newspapers for more than 200 years apply to Facebook and Twitter today. And we're going to explore that today. So let's go to question number one. Ready, John?
Yeah, did you describe how to keep score?
I think I did. I told him just to write down a hash mark, and it's 1 point for every question.
1 point for every question.
In this case, I have up to 5 points, though.
Up to this, yeah. So it's not really a question. It's a directive. Name the freedoms in the First Amendment. And in a few minutes, a horn will go off, and that means time's up. Denise Philp is back in the back, smiling, getting ready to shock you with an ugly horn.
That was a 1-minute horn. Thank you very much.
That's better. Who's got it? Anybody?
Who's confident?
Volunteer? Yes. Right, you had your hand up first. What are they?
Speech, religion. Speech.
Speech.
Religion.
Religion.
The most important one, press.
Press.
Assembly and petition.
Well done. Give yourself 1 point for each.
Did everybody get it?
Yep.
Nobody had the right to bear arms? No, about a right to
You laugh, but that is our number one wrong answer. And you can understand it because if you're waving a gun around, you can say whatever you want. It's the ultimate free speech.
Can't tell, you know, it's amazing they got it. Those that did. So many people in this country don't get it.
Here, of course, is the unexpurgated original 45 words of the First Amendment, unchanged but not unchallenged since 1791. Now, as John points out, people don't usually get this. In fact, our survey suggests only 4%, 1 in 25, can name the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment, which is the biggest reason we're in business here at Vanderbilt University. There is a kind of meltdown of a constitutional illiteracy when it comes to the First Amendment. So I have a question for you. Why would that be? How is it that we don't know what the First Amendment says, most Americans? Theories? Bless you, Karen, for answering, and that's a very good answer. Yes, you take it for granted. It comes, you're born, you got it, you don't have to fight for it, you don't have to sacrifice for it. How about schools? I mean, do schools do a good job of teaching the First Amendment? If I offered a prize to anybody who could recite the Pledge of Allegiance, people would nail it over and over and over again. And yet, teachers don't teach the 5 freedoms. And it makes sense, because if you're in a classroom trying to harness the talents of 14-year-olds, and you have a choice, you can say, follow me. I pledge, I'll follow, I'll obey. Or here are 5 areas in which you can pretty much disregard me. Which of those lessons are we going to share, right? And that unfortunately is what happens in American schools. I want to show you something real quickly. I went back to see if my generation got a better instruction on the First Amendment. This is a book from 1961, and if we could go inside, Ashley. At the time, by the way, a very common technique was to use, well, even today, they use full-color splash early in the textbook to signal the most important themes. And this was America's most fundamental freedoms. Apparently, they just invented this neon green ink because they used it everywhere. An entire generation has cataracts right now now because of this. But if you look at it, you can see something involving freedom of the press there, a newsstand, and you've got a student council meeting, which doesn't tell you anything except that Dick and Jane were elected to higher office later on in their lives. But of course, freedom of speech. Let's go to the next screen. Freedom of worship. By this time, I'm 3/5 of the way to knowing the First Amendment. And of course, I'm turning and get petition, assembly, freedom of enterprise. Wait. No mention of petition or assembly in this book, but the right to make a buck, you bet. You have to remember that every textbook is kind of written for its generation. This was Eisenhower generation. This was the generation of kids who were being raised by veterans of World War II. What were we all told? Those of us who are old enough to have heard this message, you're going to get a better education than I did. You're going to have a bigger house. You're going to have a better job. The whole notion of enterprise, making a buck, was very much part of the American fabric. And this textbook raised it to the level of a constitutional guarantee. And we just screwed up on petition and assembly, which is why a lot of us don't know about it. But this book never went back to explain it. Could we get a blow up, Ashley? I want to share this with you. Woman executive. In 1961, they had to label that so the children wouldn't be frightened. Where's the apron and who's watching her kids? To be clear, in 1961, she was not a woman executive. She was the woman executive. Stock doing very, very well, though. Look at that. Could go to the next screen, please? Okay, you're all feeling superior because you've got younger kids. They're getting a modern education in the First Amendment. This is a textbook written in the last few years. Let's go inside to see how they explain the First Amendment. Let's closer. Tell me what you notice about that description of the First Amendment.
What's missing? What's wrong?
So, a couple of things you might notice. What? Well, they're not absolute. And that kind of goes back to the core theme I had earlier about the Pledge of Allegiance. You don't want to tell kids they can say whatever they want to say. And so even though all the freedoms of the Bill of Rights are not absolute. You have a right to bear arms, but you can't bring an Uzi onto a playground. In this case, they chose to emphasize it. Ninth graders, listen very carefully. It's not absolute. But the other thing is we've obviously lost petition. This is a textbook teaching the First Amendment that left out petition. One more example. Next screen, please. This is the United States government and flashcards it gives to people who want to be U.S. citizens. So to become a citizen, you would take this set of flashcards home and you would memorize the questions and answers and hopefully pass it. So here's an example. Who was the first president of the United States? You flip it over. George Washington. Okay. Next one. Which president is called the father of our country? Clearly not a very difficult test. You flip it over. George Washington. You got George Washington nailed, you're pretty much a citizen, apparently. Here's a tougher question. Name one right or freedom guaranteed by the First Amendment. Now think about that. What's on the other side of these cards? Well, I mean, they're being... Several of you clearly need to be here. So it's going to have 5 freedoms on the other side, right? Because any one of those 5 could be right. It's speech or press or the... Here's the U.S. government's answer to that question. 4 years. 4 years. People use these flashcards, and the government didn't acknowledge the existence of freedom of the press. And I don't think it was an accident, frankly. The good news was, when I became aware of this, I was editor of USA Today, and I said, there's a spot on page 3, and this would be a great bite. And within 24 hours, the website had been updated,
There it is.
and we restored freedom of the press and the Constitution of the United States. So that is our preamble. That is what we're up against, and that is why we're here to visit today. Let's go to the next question.
What governed, what governed the new nation
No more wine, Ashley.
in the 1780s? Was it the Constitution, or the Articles of Confederation, or was it the Monroe Doctrine, or the Declaration of Independence?
All right. Excuse me for a minute. Can we get her up? Not the last line.
What we'll do is we'll get back to the square.
Let's just try it this way, the show of hands. How many people say it's the Constitution? How about the Articles of Confederation? And how about the Monroe Doctrine? 12 years, Ken, I've been doing the Monroe Doctrine, haven't gotten a vote yet, not today. How about the Declaration of Independence? And it is the Articles of Confederation.
So give yourself 1 point. Keep track right now.
Let me just talk about the Articles of Confederation for a minute. I mean, at this time, we're at war. We are governed by a Congress. There is no president. There is no Supreme Court. There is no national court. And members of Congress appoint a committee, and they come up with these articles that are going to govern. And the problem with it is that that they affirm in there state sovereignty. The national government is to oversee basically how to fund the government, how to deal internationally. But, you know, they're not funding the government. Each state is supposed to contribute based on the property values of that state. Washington is having a tough time getting money for the Army. They're having a tough time running the government, and there are all sorts of land disputes. I mean, think about Maryland, Virginia right there. They don't know where the Potomac River is. And so, you know, it's so bad that finally, and Ben Franklin was one of the ones who said, you know, we should try to take a look at whether we shouldn't revise this. We were in bad shape. The articles were there, but they did not work. But for that time, it was the very best that we could do. Ken?
Next question. By the way, the room will heat up as the competition does. Feel free to remove any clothing you'd like to. We believe in free expression of all forms. So, what was the single most important factor spurring Henry VIII to issue England's first list of banned books? Was that religion? Were marital issues that embarrassed Henry VIII? Was it technology, or was it politics? What led to the first recorded list of banned books? All right, show of hands. How many say religion? Wow. How many say marital issues? Technology. Isn't it lonely together? And politics. The correct answer is C, technology. Absolutely. What was the technology? Printing press. Gutenberg. Until Gutenberg, you couldn't produce enough books to threaten anybody. But suddenly, with Gutenberg and the printing press, books could be produced in great abundance, and government reflexively said, we got to control that. So technology. And just as with the internet, you all remember the early days of the internet, the most immediate reflex was we have to control it. Congress has to limit it. And anyway, so that has gone on throughout time. Next question, please. John?
Yeah. Has the United States Supreme Court ever held the First Amendment protects internet? Yes, in 97. Yes, in 08. Only held by the Court of Appeals, not the Supreme Court of the United States. Never held. Who says 97? And how about 08? Only appeals, not the Supreme Court. And how about never? And the answer is 1997. In 1997, something called the
Communications Decency Act, but what was struck down in the Communications Decency Act, John?
I'm sorry.
What specifically was struck down in the Communications Decency Act? The standard for kids, right?
Yeah, that's right. Congress, the court said overreach, and Congress says don't talk about breasts, and don't talk about anything that might be troublesome to children. And of course, once the appeal was filed, it was joined by the medical profession, it was joined by the law, members of the bar. So you can't really, if you're worried about freeing children, you're going to deny most of the public information they really like.
Exactly right. Indecent content for a 7-year-old would not be indecent, for a 14-year-old would not be indecent, for a 21-year-old, and yet Congress tried to make it a single standard. So let's go to the next question, which involves the Communications Decency Act. Part of the Communications Decency Act survived in '97. Does it protect newspapers from lawsuits over online comments? Does it ban indecent content on radio and TV? Or does it outlaw access to adult content by those under 21? The part of this pivotal legislation that survived did what? I can't believe you're playing. You are ineligible for a Kindle.
Thank you.
All right, show of hands. Who says A, protects newspapers? Who says B, bans indecent content? C, outlaws access to adult content? The answer is A. Give yourself a point. If you're not aware of this now, count this as perhaps your greatest blessing of the last 15 years. Our greatest blessing of the 70s was the New York Times versus Sullivan. But the passage of the Communications Decency Act is what keeps you in business today. And the reason it came about is there was a recognition that there were going to be people posting content to your websites that you would have no control over. And if somebody posted something that was defamatory, could you be held accountable for it? And Congress made clear that you could not. And that is a dramatic leap, far different from your standard of your letter to the editor in the newspaper. This was a major blow in favor of freedom on the internet. Of course, it also unleashed the demons you deal with right now. Without this legislation, you would not have online comments.
Aren't there conditions attached to that?
Yeah.
So you don't have
The more you keep your hands off, the safer you are. But one of the cleanest ways to control the comments is having other readers vote things up and down or as being indecent, so that you're not doing it. But this is major. This is made possible, every commentary on every website. And so there's a misperception that the Communications Decency Act was struck down in '97. In fact, it turned out to be a major blow in favor of a free press for the internet. Let's go to the next question. Oh, no, I don't want to go to the next question. I want to go to history. Because the very case I just explained to you, you can't sue somebody because of something right about you, kept John Seigenthaler from suing Wikipedia. Do you know his story? Could you share? This is actually the current one. This is the one in which you are not accused of capital crimes.
Well, one morning I was upstairs at my desk, and a friend called me and said, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to Google yourself and hit the Wikipedia link and then sue the bastards. And so I Googled John Seigenthaler and hit the Wikipedia link, and there came a 6-sentence biography. First sentence said, in the early 1960s, he was administrative assistant to Attorney General Robert Kennedy. Following the assassination of President Kennedy and Attorney General Kennedy, he was a suspect in their assassinations. Next sentence, nothing was ever proved. Well, that's Next sentence, he then defected to the Soviet Union for the next 12 years. If you found the First Amendment Center, You really got to be hard-pressed to want to sue somebody for libel because they said something bad about you, but I was pissed off, I will tell you. And, but the truth of the matter is, I didn't want to sue. The fact of the matter is, I could not have sued had I wanted to. There is a section of the Communications Decency Act that was not struck down, Section 230. And it separates the Internet from traditional media in that it says, and as someone said, if it's unedited, it says that you may not sue the information provider. You may not sue Wikipedia. You may not sue Google. Now you can file a suit against John or Jane Doe in court, and the court may tell the information provider it must disclose to you who the anonymous source is. I don't want to bore you with a lot of personal details, but there was no chance I was going to sue. I just thought I probably had enough investigative reporting skills to find out. And I didn't. And I wrote an article, a column in USA Today, and said, this is what happened to me, and USA Today is publishing this column, and in this column I am saying Wikipedia is an unreliable resource. Yes, it's loaded with good information, but it has much information like this from anonymous sources. Well, make a long story longer, I did get a lot of help. I was inundated from people, the same thing had happened to them, inundated from letters from people who wanted to be helpful to me. And one of them was, and the result of it was that he told me where to go to find out where the Internet Protocol number was listed. I got it, identified the company where the defamation had originated, and my friends in the media from all over the media. And I would have to single out Kit Seeley from the New York Times, but an awful lot of reporters began to focus on this company, and lo and behold, one day out front, this fellow walks in with a letter of apology, said he did it as a joke. My wife's still pissed off at him, but she's sitting in the back and is going to scold me after this. But at any rate, Wales took it down, and I would have to say they've made some effort to try to correct it. But the problem is still there.
And let me share the upshot, the next screen here. I don't know how we can read that. It's now in Wikipedia as the Seigenthaler incident. It is
reasonably accurate.
The Seigenthaler incident that changed the future of Wikipedia. So thank you, John, and welcome back from Russia. It's good to have you here. I believe the next question is yours, John.
Well, indeed it is. And when did In God We Trust first appear on U.S. coins? 1776, 1791, 1864, or 1966? Nice thing about it is a good guess is as easy to get a point as the information. Who says 76? 91? 1864? 1966. Answers 1864. Give yourself one.
Let's look at that coin.
There's the coin. In God We Trust, 1864. What's going on in 1864? Yeah, and you know, right after 9/11, President Bush said something so true. He said, today freedom and fear are at war. You know, it's been true throughout our history. When we are most afraid, our civil liberties are most at risk. And this demonstrates that. 1864, Civil War is raging. We put God's name on a piece of metal. If you just go back through history, you will find again and again, beginning in the Revolution, through the Civil War, through the McCarthy era, through 9/11. I mean, with the Patriot Act. Sure.
Michael.
Do you know when In God We Trust became the official motto?
Don't.
Well, I mean, that's the next question.
So
you're going to get a point.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I'm going to stop right here and let you get it. Next question.
Let me just make one more mention. This is interesting because, as John points out, fear will strike, hard. Fear causes people to lose sight of the constitutional limitations between church and state. It was a minister who went to the Mint and said, "Our country's in dire straits because we turned our back on God, and we need to embrace God." And he had a lot of latitude and put God on the coin. So let's go to the next question. Anticipating Michael's, in what decade did In God We Trust become our national motto? Was it the 1860s along with the coin? Was it the 1930s during the height of the Depression? Was it the 1950s, the birth of television? Or was it not a national motto at all? And why are you wasting our time with a question like this? You guys are so solemn. Did I mention the bar's still open? It's a very serious approach to this. All right, time's up. Okay, who says 1860s? Show of hands. 1930s? 1950s? And it's not our national motto. Look at that. Look at the number of people. It's a close call, John.
Ken, everybody knows what our national motto is. And, I see these hands go up. The truth, man, is down deep, everybody knows it's E pluribus unum.
E pluribus unum.
Isn't that right? Yeah. Our national motto is E pluribus unum. No matter what you say.
Okay, that sounds like a foreign language, John. What does that mean?
E pluribus means out of many one.
Out of many one made perfect sense for the birth of this nation.
Of course it
absolutely. Did. Which is why the correct answer to this question is the 1950s. In 1776, we adopted a new national motto, E pluribus unum. Perfect. It's even Latin. Classy. But if you remember the theme about the Civil War, when we are afraid as a country, we bend the separation of church and state. We bend constitutional principles. We bend rules about torture, and privacy and other things because we're scared. Why are we scared in the 50s? Communism. What do we call communists? What are among our favorite nicknames? Godless communists.
That's right.
Godless commies. And if you're a politician in 1952, you went like, I can't be accused of being a godless commie, so what can I really do to address that? I'm going to get real right with God. We're going to shove God into every aspect of government we possibly can, so no one can ever accuse me of being godless. And so it was during this period that we added In God We Trust to our paper money. We rewrote the Pledge of Allegiance to add one nation under God, and we decided that we needed a second national motto. A great nation with two mottos, and this was the second. And In God We Trust. And this is actually complicated things because it got approved, right? It's now can be put in the classroom. It can be on any public school wall, and courts have said, "Oh, that's not religion." Ignore the reference to God. It's simply historic. The nation adopted in '54, and of course our national motto. It really made things complicated. I see some folks in this room who are not chanting about godless commies. I want to give you a brief glance at a couple things from the '50s to give you a sense of the era. If you are not careful in a time when you're really afraid, it will affect the quality of your journalism. And I just want to share this example with you. This is Look magazine. How many of you remember Look? Wow. We're all old. But Look and Life were as big a they were huge newspapers in the 40s, news magazines in the 40s and 50s. And in 1944, what's our relationship with the Soviet Union? Allies. So the editor at Look assigns a reporter to do a profile of Stalin. Let's see, he's just a guy named Joe. He knows Arctic meteorology. He reads Leatherstocking Tales. He uses soap.
Clean man.
And he's an expert at war. And it is what we in the profession have always called a puff piece, right? So here's the cover. Look at this. On page 74, Ralph Parker analyzes the personality of the amazing leader of the equally amazing Russian people. In 44, we are allies, and this is the most glowing. He's not one of those old kind of Soviets. This is James Bond of Soviet leaders. Very cool, and it could not be more positive. So apparently, so before we go to the next screen, what's going on in 1948 internationally? Our relationship with the Soviet Union. Soured, right? It's post-Berlin. They appear to be our greatest threat in post-World War II. And unbelievably, Look magazine, short on imagination, assigns the very same story, a profile. Life story of Stalin. Check this out. This small man with drooping shoulders tyrannizes 1/5 of the world.
That is soap.
Things changed between 44 and 48, but his posture didn't go to hell. He didn't lose his tailor. But you take these two articles next to one another, it's glowing adjectives, amazing people, amazing leader, and kind of a slob and a tyrant. Same publication 4 years apart. Fear can do that to journalism if we're not careful. I have one more example, also from Look. Could the Reds seize Detroit? This is 1948, and it's just ridiculous. You all know the Reds are in the National League, Detroit's an American. But these are actually police officers dressed up as Ruski spies taking over Detroit. Do I have one more page inside? Yeah, we do. The switchboard operators apparently were told to wear old dresses so they could lie on the floor and ooze fake blood that day. I have a question for you. Why does the Detroit Police Department cooperate with Look magazine to frighten the heck out of its citizens? Why would they ever do that? Isn't it irresponsible? Yes, sir. Unions, I've never had that answer before. I'm not saying it's not right, but that's the first time I've heard that.
Budget needs?
Budget needs. Think about it. At the very next city council meeting, the Detroit police chief is in there saying, I need 10 more Tommy guns, 15 more officers. The Russians are coming. The Russians are coming. I read it in Look magazine. And I want to be clear here and be fair. It's not cynical. He was probably concerned about the possible Soviet takeover of the auto industry. It is not dissimilar to what we've experienced in this country in the last 10 years. Every police chief is always going to be concerned about terrorism on their watch. How do you prepare for that? Hard to know, but you think maybe I should get more equipment. Maybe we need more men and women on the force. And you go in with a higher budget request. And that is why fear is so hard to shake in America once we fall down that little hole. Because people who are assigned to protect us don't want to be sleeping on the job. They inadvertently or intentionally reinforce the fear. Think about the color coding at airports. Is that a fair warning? Is that going to help us, or does that somehow reinforce the fear? And the press, if government's warning you there could be an attack, you feel some obligation to report it. That creates a really nasty cycle from which it's hard to escape, and means that fear continues to put pressure on freedom for years after something like 9/11. Let's go to the next question. This is actually just a setup. How many of you have gone to YouTube to watch this? Okay. It's amazing. When this story broke, there have been 2,000 people, and I've got 6 million so far who have seen it worldwide. It's a fascinating First Amendment case. In fact, I was telling somebody today that what we do for a living, if it's not apparent, is we spend a lot of time answering calls from your reporters. If any of you have First Amendment issues, we're there, we understand deadlines, we get back to them right away. And we've been swamped with inquiries about this. I got a call from a guy working in Time Magazine, said, doesn't this fall outside the category of the First Amendment? And I said, no, it absolutely doesn't. It's clear cut. There is a case in 1969 that is a classic that basically says if you incite somebody to imminent lawless action, you can be prosecuted. But certainly no one envisioned that imminent lawless action taking place a world away, and nothing about this video specifically says go burn down an embassy. But there are still people, there are scholars who argue this falls outside protected speech. We don't think so. There's a lot of dumb stuff that's protected by the First Amendment, and that is a good thing. But having said that, you know, there is a tendency for people to say, you know, the internet has unleashed this horrible stuff. I mean, Muhammad, you know, is getting creamed, right? And there's nasty, horrible things being said. But that's nothing new. And a pivotal First Amendment case involves Larry Flynt and...
Next question. Yeah, I mean, you know, that's right. I mean, the prophet was accused of all sorts of perversion. And we have our own prophets.
Yeah. I want to be clear, we're not comparing Falwell and Muhammad in any way, shape, or form.
No, and bless the prophet. We're not. But Jerry sued Larry Flynt because hustlers said Falwell, one, was gay, was homophobic, had fathered illegitimate children, had sex with his mother. Okay, answers down. Who says that Larry Flynt said that Jerry Falwell was gay? Anybody? Homophobic?
I want to skip.
Fathered illegitimate children. Had sex with his mother.
We really know a lot about Falwell.
Good memory. Yeah, that's right. Well, yes, that's what it said.
Ashley?
In a piece, that's from Hustler. Now, at the time this was published, most of the major slick magazines, fashion magazines, national magazines were running this ad. And the thrust of the ad was that the most exciting experience you could possibly have that you could remember was the first time you had a little drink of Campari. And where Jerry's picture is there, always was a celebrity, sometimes an entertainment celebrity, sometimes a sports celebrity, first time to have Campari. And here, Flynt takes the ad, reproduces it virtually, and then says that he had, not only that he had sex with his mother, he had sex with his mother while he's drunk in an outhouse.
Now that's low.
And you know, I mean, is what was said about the prophet worse? I mean, what else can you say? And so he sues. And a jury gives him $100,000 in actual damages and $100,000 in punitive damages, and it's appealed, and the Court of Appeals upholds that, and then it goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. And you know, those of us in the media, we are so likely to make judgments about members of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overturned this unanimously. Anybody know who wrote the opinion? It was William Rehnquist. And I will tell you, it is a thoughtful, it is a, you know, for a First Amendment advocate, it really makes your heart sing. He goes back and tracks the history of cartoons. And he says, this, you know, this is not, this is a pantomime. And he says, clearly it is protected by speech, and his colleagues all agree with him. And so, again, clearly the film was protected. As William Rehnquist said, clearly this was protected. Tim?
So let's go from the profane to the sacred. Next screen, please. Betsy Ross's role in designing our flag was revealed by James Madison, her grandson William, an 1814 biography, or Paul Revere, who found some time to ride through the streets yelling, "Betsy's designed a flag." It's going pretty well.
Pretty damn good.
Yeah. But the new stuff's working.
Absolutely.
All right, who says James Madison is the person who told us all about Betsy Ross? Thank you. Who says her grandson William? Who says an 1814 biography? And who credits Paul Revere? You're so naive. but we love you for that. That's a fresh, The correct answer is her grandson, William. We share this with you because, we start this presentation by explaining no one knows what the First Amendment says, right? Nobody knows. And yet everyone knows who designed the American flag. And if you had a refrigerator out front, flat screen TV, ladies and gentlemen, just tell us who designed the American flag, and you can win this TV. 100 out of 100 are going to say Betsy Ross. There's just no question about it, even though there's not a word of truth to it.
I've seen that painting, Ken.
You've seen that painting?
She's got there, she's displaying the flag. George Washington's right there. She's ready to give it to him. I've seen it.
It's like somebody
I don't know who the photographer was. said me, but I've seen that. I've seen that picture.
One of the things that said, now I go, wait a second, we have the Betsy Ross house. Yes, she had a house. Yeah, that's good. In fact, at the Betsy Ross house, they have a pamphlet that says, according to legend, Betsy Ross designed the American flag. There's nothing to tie Betsy Ross to the flag whatsoever. She's a seamstress. She gets mentioned in none of the writings of the always prolific founding fathers.
This was a good friend of George Washington who filed an action in Congress saying, I designed that flag, and I want for my services a pint of ale. I'm sorry, a pint of port. He didn't get it.
And they said, because so many people contributed to the design of the flag.
It was the myth.
But let me tell you about Billy. Billy is the grandson of Betsy Ross. He goes to essentially a historical society event in 1871, and he presents his findings about his grandmother, Betsy Ross. And he tells a story that has become so well known to all of you. And it goes viral. That's the only thing he said. And for something to go viral in 1871, that's quite a trip. But the story sounded so good, and here's why. After the Civil War, women had it. I mean, their lives were hard enough, and now men had gone off to war. The economy was in shambles. And they're beginning to think about maybe we have a right to vote. Maybe we should be in the workforce. The stirrings of feminism after the Civil War. Those who were opposed to that love the Betsy Ross story, because you too can stay home and serve your country by sewing, right? And what an appealing story. And so that is largely what fueled the Betsy Ross story. A way a woman can contribute to the future of the country without losing all those things we so admire about women. It just went viral. And so there's no truth to it. There's, the people painted paintings. They wrote books. There are generations of school kids who have read Betsy Ross's biography. Total fiction. And so that brings us back to my original point. We have come to a point where everyone knows who Betsy Ross is and no one knows what the First Amendment is. We've got some work to do. Let's go to the next question. Okay, it's the lightning round. Now, I hope you've been keeping track of your points. Talent, I know there's a lot of slashes on your sheet, so you might glance down and tally them now so you know where you are. This is your chance to get 5 points real quickly. And the question in each case is, which of these are protected by the First Amendment according to federal courts? Okay? So the federal decisions on each of these 5, tell me which of these are protected by the First Amendment. We're going to shoot for wrapping up about 6:05.
Okay, good. Well, we don't have a vote to go through, so we don't have to.
Right, yeah, we're okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you some time. 4, 3, 2, 1. Pencils down. All right. Who says, how many of you say, raise your hand if you believe movies are protected by the First Amendment? That's correct, but it might surprise you as to how relatively recently that occurred. We have films going back to the 1890s, but we don't get protection for movies until
the 1850s and 1950s, and it comes as a result of a foreign film. It's called A Miracle. It's an Italian-made film. It stars Anna Magnani. Rossellini directed it. The story is that Anna is a dim-witted peasant girl. She's in the fields one day, and suddenly, striding across the pasture, comes this figure, bearded, robed, sandals. She thinks it's St. Joseph, and the father of Jesus, and she has sex with him, and there is a baby, second coming, the miracle. It wins awards at the film festivals.
pretty gutsy stuff for 1951.
And it comes to the United States, and Cardinal Spellman, Prince of the Catholic Church, takes the pulpit in St. Patty's and denounces it. He actually damned the movie from the pulpit. And the result of it was, of course, the New York Board of Regents then had censorship control, and they declared that it was sacrilegious. And the board was taken to court, and the courts ruled that sacrilegious was much too broad a term, and that, as a result, the film was protected. And for the first time, the courts ruled that movies were protected.
So give yourself 1 point if you said that was protected. Next, video games. How many of you said that's protected? Yes, indeed. Video games are protected.
But not always.
Pong was not protected. Pac-Man was not protected. But as video games became more sophisticated, they had plots, they had soundtracks, they had characters, began to look to federal courts a lot like movies.
Had a theme.
And they applied the principle of the miracle to extend First Amendment protection to video games. So to this day, the more sophisticated ones are protected by the First Amendment. How about topless dancing? How many say that's protected by the First Amendment? Very smart people in this room.
Oh, that's good.
You know you're topless dancing, clearly.
That's right.
It's an art.
So topless dancing is protected because it is a form of expression, and it's a performance piece that involves erotic moves. And
Different theme, but a theme.
And Sandra Day O'Connor, there must have been Chardonnay in the chambers that day. She writes an opinion that says there's a slim thread of protection for topless dancing. Apparently, a Supreme Court reference to a G-string. So, or somebody needs to do a law review article on that. So how is it, if this is protected by the First Amendment, states are able to control where topless bars are? Time, place, and manner? No. What are the two parts to a topless bar? Topless bar. And when we repealed prohibition, the federal government gave states the right to control the sale of alcohol. And so they can control topless dancing through the alcohol part of that, which is why sometimes you see topless bars become topless naked juice bars. They take off some clothes and take away the alcohol. Almost never works out. turns out alcohol is critical to the equation. Oh, another kind of dancing is the jitterbug protected by the First Amendment. We've all seen Footloose in its many incarnations. Was that a crock? Is that possible? Could a city really bar social dancing in certain places in town? How many of you say that's protected by the First Amendment? No.
No way.
It is not protected by the First Amendment. A jitterbug dance, as opposed to an erotic topless dance, is not a performance for a third party. It's not an expression to a third party. It's a social interaction. It's like a pickup basketball game. Yes, I've heard from some people who say, well, can't you tango for peace? Yes,
that's protected.
You'd have to be awfully desperate for a point to make that argument. Social dancing is not protected, and in fact, the Footloose thing is not that far-fetched. If you go in the city of New York, arguably the most free city in the world, and you go into a restaurant or bar, and you put some money in and you listen to the Stones or the Foo Fighters or whatever your choice might be, and you start dancing because you're so moved by the music, they will tell you to stop. Because in order for you to dance, they have to have a license. The state can license dancing in public places, so it is not protected by the First Amendment because it's simply a social exercise. Finally, liking someone on Facebook, is that free expression protected by the First Amendment? How many of you say yes? Interesting. The right answer should be yes. The answer is no. We have one federal court decision out of Virginia, and I think it's a judge who doesn't spend a lot of time in social media. And he said, it's just a click of the mouse. That's really not expressing something. But we all know that if you like a Facebook page, you've expressed some kind of opinion. And it's a vague and it's a very general opinion. So in this case, I'm sorry, it is not protected by the First Amendment. I am confident we do this exercise in 2 years from now, that will change. It just sometimes takes a while for the judges to catch up with the technology. I mean, the movie thing's a good example. It took 60 years for judges to recognize that as a form of free expression. Facebook likes a free expression, but courts haven't found it yet. So tally your score. We're getting down to the last couple of questions. This next one, I want to show you that, John, this is a question you were going to lead, I think.
I am. Who was the first president to decline another term in office, in part because of an ugly press?
And
There's no multiple choice here. Right. I mean, if you're going to say Johnson, you have to say which one. If you're going to say Roosevelt, you have to say which one. I mean, if you're going to say Adams, you have to say which one.
And I want to point out, I don't have it up here, but this is good for 5 points because it's markedly higher, more difficult than a multiple choice wimpy question. So you can score 5 points with this, and I'm coming to the audience for your answers.
Thanks for a big hit.
So let's come to grips with that.
Everybody got it down?
Let's go
around and see.
It's a lot of people here, but
some samples.
I just want to go down this. What's your answer?
George Washington.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm glad you're here, and I don't mean to be insulting you.
Maybe you didn't get it.
I don't know. I want to point something out. Okay. I'm very sorry. But it says who was the first United States president, but it goes on from there.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. Yeah. He said George Washington. You want to go sit with him? Okay?
John Adams.
John Adams. Over there.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson. Taft. Lyndon Johnson. Speak up.
Washington.
George Washington. There's a disease over here. Just those flashcards should not have influenced you.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson. George.
Washington.
Paralyzed by fear. What else?
Jefferson.
Jefferson. Wow, it's a cult. All right. Over here.
Andrew Johnson.
Thank you.
John Adams.
John Adams.
Never been one.
Never been one. That's okay.
No, that's good.
Anybody else? Teresa, you have no answer?
I have no.
John Adams. Anything else? Anybody else have? What's your answer?
You got Andrew Johnson.
Andrew Johnson. Very good. John, the first United States president to decline another term in part because of ugly press coverage.
Congratulations. You didn't back down. You had the guts to stay in.
The great thing was the courage of the others. After humiliation.
After he held you up and let him turn and twist in the wind, I mean, they stayed with it.
So, John, how is this possible? Our beloved father of our country.
Yeah, he
was revered.
He's our first president. He's the father of our country.
That's 5 points.
5 points, yeah. A lot of people, that kept a lot of people in the game. I mean, we might have seen I've had one right there. He was the father of our country. He was beloved. He was admired above all others. He had no competitor when it came to be president of the United States. He had been our leader in the Revolution. He had presided over the convention. But there came a time in his second term He had sent representatives from our country to Great Britain to try to sign a treaty. They signed that treaty, and you know, by this time people are saying, who's going to follow him? And John Adams has some supporters, Thomas Jefferson has some supporters. About a third of the papers in the country were pushing for Thomas Jefferson, and they're so upset. The French were with us in the Revolution. The British, that was the enemy.
Don't go to that until I tell you to.
And, you know, so, and so the press begins to give it to him. And first it's a needle here and there. And before it's finished, they're demanding that he apologize. They're demanding that he give it up. Tom Paine writes a letter from France in which he denounces him and releases the letter to the public before it gets in the press, but it gets into the press. And you know, true enough, Martha needed him at Mount Vernon for the plantation. True enough, he did not want to create a dynasty. He did not want a monarchy. He wanted a democracy. But the truth also is that that press coverage got to him. And finally he says to Alexander Hamilton, he said, I will no longer be abused by these representatives of a free press. No longer will I am going home. And he did go home. It was John Adams becomes the president, and the media goes after him in just the same way it had denounced George Washington. All the things we think and have read are true. We read very little about those negative press criticism of our beloved founder. But the fact is, that was the principal motive that he went home.
You know, you think of the heat you've taken over the years, especially like during the height of the Clinton years, well, and Bush as well, about how we're out to get people in positions of power. It's a great American tradition, going back to George Washington. We're simply being patriotic. Before we move to the final question, because the buses are going to pull up in about 10 minutes, I want you to tally your score. Take a moment and tally your score. Okay, for most of you, those will be primary numbers, so I just wanted to have you all be totally in touch with where you are in this competition, because I want this competition to build to a fever pitch now as we ask the final question. Ashley, ratification of the Constitution was tied to a demand for A, preservation of slavery, B, a Bill of Rights, C, 2 senators for every state, or a promise, unbelievable as it may sound, that there would never be a state income tax. Which of these led to ratification of the Constitution?
Just pick as many as you like.
As always, pick one. Pick the best answer, as your teacher would say in the 6th grade. All right, time's up. How many say that's all about preserving slavery? Okay. How about a Bill of Rights? How about 2 senators for every state? And finally, I love it when it's just one guy.
They finally got a voting.
It's like, what school did you go to? Anyway, and then no state income tax. The correct answer is B, a Bill of Rights. So, that's 1 point. That's one big old point.
That is the big question.
What I want to share with you is, you know, we've loved being with you, and that's the final question, and we'll be into the award ceremony shortly. But you know, what we hope you come away with today, I hope you learned something new about the First Amendment you may not know when you walked in. I hope you picked up a few things to win bar bets with. The George Washington thing you can usually win a beer or two on. But But this next question, this is, if you only leave here with one thing, it is the answer to this question. Because it is a moment in American history that very few Americans are aware of, and yet it may be, in our view, the most important moment. You know, this country was in a mess in the 1780s. It's, you think about nation building, how that works, how difficult it is for us to get Iraq on its feet, and who knows what's going to happen in Afghanistan. This country started on the run. 1776, somebody shot at somebody else at Lexington and Concord, and we're off and running. And we put together that lame Articles of Confederation